Hi everyone, my name is Dominic Arojado. I'm a web developer, and these are guides, tips, and tricks to web development. So in this video is a continuation of the creating your own bar graph in React and TypeScript. So in this video, we're now going to write the test for it. So let me just show you the recap of what we have done in the earlier video. So this is what we have accomplished by the end of the first video for the bar graph. So there's first bar graph, we can display all the values, all positive values into percentages. And then the second bar graph, we can display one negative value and display the rest of the positive values elevated. And for the third bar graph, we are displaying all negative values, and they are all, going downwards because the bars line is elevated all the way to the top. All right, so now it's time to write tests for it. So if you're new to writing tests, what I normally do, let's just first commit all of our changes here. Let's say implement bar graph component. Okay. And normally when you write test files, I normally write it in under the test folder. So this is the so normally when I write test files or create test files, I put them under the test folder, so that is separated from the main files. So I'm going to write the test for the BarItem component. In this case, I'm going to write the same file name, BarItem dot tests, and using the same file extension of the BarItem dot tsx. So yes, we are going to use TypeScript as well when we write tests. It helps us to utilize the benefits of TypeScript when also writing the code for our test file. Okay. And in JS and testing library, using create React app, they have already set up all the necessary packages and configuration to help you easily start with your test. So in this case, functions such as describe is already available for you to use, like describe. Let's just first import BarItem, and when after you have imported, we can basically use the describe function by just basically block to help explain what you are testing. In this case, I'm testing the BarItem component, and then the second argument is a function. Inside the describe block, we can basically write our tests like this, or what I like to use is the it, which is the alias of test function, which runs the test. So it should render a bar with positive value. Okay. So this is where we basically, write our test code and verify that, it should render a bar with positive value. Okay. So before we add any code to this it block, I'm going to create a render component function, which basically renders our BarItem component. In this case, render BarItem like this. And since we are using TypeScript in our test file as well, we will encounter TypeScript error. And remember, we have exported the type props. In this case, we can reuse it here as well. So now that we have the props right here, we can pass in or do a spread operator. And now the TypeScript error is gone. And now we can use this render component in each of our test block or it block. So once we call the render component, we need to pass in the legend, the bar percentage, the rise percentage, and the is negative. So in this case, we're testing with a positive value, so we can just pass false here. For these three other values, instead of hard coding the value right here, we can actually use Faker. So Faker is a library, JavaScript library that helps us generate massive amounts of fake but realistic data. In this case, it helps with, writing testing or, for development. So we are using this for testing. And in their documentation, they have a lots of, functions for generating random address, date, lorem ipsum, all of that you can use to, basically use it for your tests. So let's first install it. Yarn add Baker at baker.js. Okay, once it's installed, we can now use it and basically create variables here. Baker.lorem. So I imported Faker, and using the Faker object, you can do faker.lorem.sentence. So this generates, sentence right here, which is good for our legend. And then for the bar percent, we can use the data type number. In number, you can pass an object argument with min and max. So, percent is basically 0 to 100. We can convert this into a bar percentage by just adding a bar percent, the percent symbol. And same thing for the rise percent. We can use the same thing that we did for the bar percent. All right. So now we have rendered our component. We pass in the expected props. How do we validate that it is doing what it's expected it to be? So one of the easiest way for us to verify is that, there is no class of is negative, because this is a positive, bar item. We are passing negative is false, so we don't expect is negative to be there in the class name. So let's first query for the bar item. So how do we query this? We actually need to do something in our component right here. We need to add in the data test ID. I'm just going to use the same name we use for class name. And the reason why we're not directly querying using the class, because our class name may change in the future, but the test ID shouldn't change at all, because we are referring it or we are querying it in the test file. So it's better to separate them early on, as your class name may change in the future. So I'm going to do the same for the rest. Just add in the suffix. All right, so now we have the data test ID, and we can query them. Let's first query the bar item element, this one. Bar item element using the screen from testing library. So screen is an object with functions we can use to query elements in the render component. So remember, we use render from the testing library React. So this render functions renders our component in a test environment. It's not really the browser, but it's kind of similar, but there are a few differences with them. So in the testing environment, stuff like, height, window width are all set by default, and it's slightly different from the browser. So just take note of that. And we can query by, remember, we add in the test ID. we can query by the test ID, and that is just BarItem. And once we have the element, we can do the expect. It's a jest global function made available by Create React App. We pass in the element and do what we call a custom matcher methods to basically verify the test case. In this case, we expect BarItem element to have class. So this is a matcher method from the testing library specific to the DOM to have class of it's negative. But because we don't actually expect it to have a class, we can just add a dot not. So expect not to have class is negative. All right, so now it's time to run our first test case. We can do that by running yarn test and pass in the coverage. I like to pass in coverage to see how much we have covered when we run this test. It's really useful to know how many statements or which lines you have not covered yet, and how many percentage of the coverage your test cases has achieved. Okay. All right, so our first test case has passed, and we easily achieve 100% test coverage because, in BarItem, there's no if and else condition. It's basically straightforward. The only thing that we're doing here is negative, and the rest are just passing the props. So even though we already achieved 100%, it's better to also test those expectation we have for other elements. So for example, for the BarItem main, we are passing bar percentage. So we expect the style height to be exactly what we are passing to it. So let's do that. Bar main element, query by test ID, BarItem main. We expect bar main element to have style of, this to have style accepts an object, which we can pass in the CSS property and pass in the value. All right, so this should pass as well. Okay, and it does. So we can just repeat the same for the offset. Pass in the offset element, and we expect the height to be the rise percentage. Let's just stop this one. All right, it still passed. And lastly, we want to check whether the legend is also correct. BarItem legend. We expect the bar legend to have text content, which is the same as the legend that we generated randomly using Faker. All right, and this should pass as well. All right, so now for the second test case, I just want to make sure that we're also handling if it's negative value. So we can actually just copy the code from the first test case, just make this as true, and this should be without the not. All right, so once we save our changes, the yarn test automatically reruns the scripts or the test cases and verifies it. So as you can see, should render a bar with positive value, passes. Should render a bar with negative value, also pass. And the coverage is 100%. All right, so writing test was easy, right? Now it's time to write BarGraph. Now it's time to write test for the BarGraph component. So same thing we did here. Let's create the initial structure, BarGraph. BarGraph. And I forget to explain why we are creating this render component function. So let's say in the future you change your BarItem component name to something else. All you have to do is just rename this in these lines right here. You don't have to rename them in each of the times you've rendered it. So it's easier to, make changes when you have a renaming in the component. And yeah, it just makes it reusable as well. Okay. So now that we have the bar graph component structure, what do we need to test? So we can actually use the same reference we did here, or what we call the same values we did for the 3 bar graphs. So let's say we need to, render the bar graph with all positive values. That is our first test case. Our second test case is we have positive values with 1 negative value. And then the last test case is all negative values. So we can use this as our test case. So it should render or basically convert values, positive values, to percentages. So this is our first graph basically. And we need to create the data array. So instead of using Faker to generate the random, values, I'm not going to use that simply because when we generate random number or values, we also need to make sure it is converting into the correct percentage. And that whole logic is actually not going to be simple or straightforward. You might have to, copy the codes from your main file, which is the bar graph, in order to get the correct percentage. And it's just like copying this, this whole code that makes our tests complicated. So in this case, I'm not going to use Faker. I am going to use Faker for the legend though. But for the values, I'm just going to simply use what we have from our app component. Okay, replace all of this with Faker. And then this one as well. All right, so this is our data array. You can render a component with a data array, as this is the props required by the bar graph component. Now we need to basically know the expectation of these values. What are the expected percentages? Okay, so how to get it? Percentages. So we can actually just inspect our element here and get these percentages right here: 29%, 43%, 100%, and 71. So I'm going to add it here. So I'm aligning the index of each elements to the index of the expected percentage. So when we look through the elements, we are using their index to refer to, the expected value, or in this case, expected percentages. So 100%, 71%. Okay. So how do we query for all of these bar items? So we can actually use the same test ID that we did. So we can do like this: bar item, bar percentages items. So instead of just querying for one element, we can query for all the elements using query all by test ID. This is going to be an array of elements, so we can do a loop here. Before we do the loop, we can actually already do an expectation right here. We expect that the array of elements or the array of bar percentage items has the same length as our data array. So because data array is the one that we pass into the props, if it has a length of 4, then our bars is also 4 in length. All right, so this should pass as expected. All right, and it did, and you can see how useful the test coverage is. I can see that line 17 of bar graph is not covered yet. This is because we don't have any negative value, and hence this was not covered in our test case. So as we write more tests for the bar graph, we will eventually be able to achieve 100%. But for now, let's continue with our first test case. Now this has passed. We can now loop through the element. And remember, you're going to use the index as well. So let's just define it there as well. And we expect that this element BarItem main, which is the main bar, has a style that is the height of this one. So expected percentage using the index has the same as the expected. So the first bar, which is in index 0, has 29%, index 1, 43%, index 2, 100%, and the last one is 71%. So this is what it's doing. Let's save this and see if it's passed. All right, and it still does. As you can see, all pass. Just to, see that this test is not fooling us, let's pass in the incorrect expected here, and it will fail. All right, as you can see, the expected, what the test has verified it that it is a 29%, but we are expecting it to be 30, and hence this test case failed. So just to show you that it's not fooling us, right? It's just that we have always writing it in the correct way or in the expected way. So now we can do the rest of the checks. So what else can we check here? We can check that the offset is all 0 because it's all negative values. I mean all positive values. So let's query for the bar offset items. All by test ID, bar item offset. For each element index, we expect the element to have 0%. So all of the offsets are all 0. We don't need the index here. Let's see if it passes. All right, and it passes as well. We can actually refactor this, be like this, so that we just loop once. That saves us a little bit of time. And we can also make sure that our offset is the same as the data array length. Same thing we're doing for the bar percentage items. And let's also query for the legend. Bar legend items. Query all by test ID. Okay, so same thing we did here. We access it by its index and expect to have a text content of the data array legend. It's going to be like this, index.legend. All right, so This should pass as well. All right. Okay. So I think we're done with our first test case. Oh, wait, there's one more. Remember, we have this bars line right here. Let's add in a data test ID so we can query it. Since it's all positive values, the bars line remains at the bottom, or it means that the bottom CSS probability is 0%. So let's just add in the tests for that bars line element, or just simply bars line. Screen query by test ID, bars line. So we can add it here. Expect bars line to have a style, which is the bottom, to be 0%. Okay. And this should pass. Great. And we're done with the first test case. Let's move on to the next one. It should render or convert. It should convert positive values and one negative value to percentages. So this is basically our second graph. This second graph right here. Let's get the data array from our app component. All right. All this legend should be in using figure. Okay. And let's render the component. Okay, so we need the expected percentages as well, which we can get from inspecting the element again. All right, so it's 56%, 33%, 56, 33, this is 22, and finally 78. So this is all the expected percentages. We also need one for the expected offsets. So we are pushing or elevating all the positive values except the one with the negative value. So this is 22%, 22%, 0%, and 22%. All right, I got it here from inspecting the element, 22, 22, 0, and 0. All right, so yeah, I've given you the expected percentage, the expected offset. I like to give you a challenge and try to do this, or like try to complete the code here with, using the first test case as your reference. So you can pause this video and try to do this challenge if you want to. But if not, I'm now going to show you the expected code. So actually, I'm just gonna copy the code right here. And instead of 0% for the offset, we can get the expected offsets and index. For the legends, it's the same. For the bars line, we expect it to be 22%. So you can actually do like this, expected bars lines, 22%. You can change this. I don't know if you want to do this. It's definitely up to you. I'm just gonna do it anyway. And let's run this test. Let's see if it passes. All right, and it does. And as you can see, because we have one negative value in our data array, it has managed to cover line number 17. And basically that contributes to 100% of the test coverage. So you may think that, we're already done here, but just an extra, making our test case more reliable. We also want to make sure that, it also converts all the negative values. So negative values to percentage, which is our third bar graph, basically. So let's just get the data array from our app component again. All negative values. Okay. Let's get the expected percentages and the offsets. Let's just delete this first. Okay, so let's inspect the third bar graph. So the main ones, or the percentages, are 21%, 43%, 100%, and 71%. For the bars line, it's 100%. Okay, for the offsets are all different. It's going to be 79%, 157%, 0%, and lastly, 29%. Okay, so, oops, I think I made the wrong edit here. This is actually, I was editing the wrong test case. Let me just revert that. Okay, this is where it should be. Okay, so now we run this test case and see if it still passes. All right, and there you go. We are now done writing tests for our bar graph component. So yeah, I hope you learn a lot from this video. Don't forget to, subscribe, like this video, and share with your friends or your network if you find that this will be helpful for them as well. As always, do watch out for new videos or new posts related to, React and TypeScript with tests. So thank you for all the support, and yeah, see you again in my next video. Bye.